Thank you. Thanks to Engineering Ireland for the opportunity to make this presentation today, and thanks to everybody who's taking part of their time out of their evening to attend. So I just want to share with you a little bit about Newbase, a little bit about the concept of the thinking about how to set up a company outside of China, and how one comes to the conclusion that Ireland is a good place to set it up, and then how we register that product. So Newbase Shanghai exists Newbase China exists in Shanghai for 10 more years, and recently, in the last number of years, decided that it wanted to set up a facility outside of China. And this is a trend that's happening in China, where a lot of Chinese-based companies are now looking to expand outside of China. And that expansion or development outside of China is being promoted by the Chinese government as well. So we see a lot of companies in Europe and around the world being partnered by a Chinese company, or a Chinese company like Newbase, setting up an operation outside of Europe. So we're going to talk a little bit about, if you sitting in a seat in Shanghai and you decide you're going to set up outside of China, how do you come to that decision where to set up? We're going to talk a little bit about Europe, why was Europe picked as part of that decision, and then, out of that, why was Ireland picked, okay? And then once Newbase group has decided to set up a company in Ireland, in Carrickmacross and Monaghan, then the next step is really, how do we get that company registered? So the company has to be registered with the Irish authorities, which is part of the European group. And then how does one register to get that product exported to Ireland, to China? So I suppose before we start, maybe a little bit about myself. So, I have 20 plus years working in multinational companies, mainly in the quality and the regulatory environment. About half of that time period is spent working in infant formula companies, and the other 10 plus years is working in medical device companies. And this is really, a combination of startup companies like Newbase is, to more mature companies. As part of my work career, I've done a lot of work with regulatory authorities, both in Ireland, the US, and in China. Some you might be familiar with, such as the Irish, the NSAI or the BSI, work with the US Food Administration Authority, the FDA, the equivalent in China to their CFDA, and other organizations in China that you need to work with in order to register a company and register formulations, such as the CNCA. Most of my manufacturing or nutrition experience is working with a company based in Ireland called Abbott Nutrition. So I worked for Abbott Nutrition for many years in what is called as third-party manufacturing. So this group, which was based in Sligo, or is still based in Sligo, effectively manages third-party manufacturers that make Abbott product. So these are non-Abbott companies making Abbott product. And there's a group dedicated in Sligo to managing that. So as part of that group, I would have dealt with some of the bigger dairy infant formula suppliers, such as Fonterra in New Zealand and Arla in Denmark. From my medical device point of view, work with companies like Alcon Laboratories in Cork, which is a company that makes intraocular lenses. Work with Abbott Diagnostics in Longford, make diagnostic kits. And for example, Owens and Minor in Kells that make procedural kits, disposable procedure kits. And my background really is postgraduate diploma in quality assurance from UCG, honours diploma from DIT in Dublin in applied science, and a degree from Trinity. So I suppose before we start, there's just a few things to know about infant formula business and formula business. There's a discussion going on for many, many years now about, you know, the challenge or the competition between breastfeeding and infant formula. And, you know, this discussion has really now been built into the regulations and through the World Health Organization and Codex. They're now particular wording that can and cannot be used when it comes to infant formula. And really this infant formula, this wording is to recognize, and I think, you know, many companies agree with it. So this is to recognize that, you know, the best way of feeding an infant is breastfeeding. So breast milk is the gold standard. And, you know, breast milk really provides all the nutrition that a young baby needs. And, you know, mother's nature is sophisticated enough to change the composition of the breast milk as the baby gets older. So the vitamins, the minerals, the composition changes to match the child's growth, you know. So breast milk is seen as the gold standard. But nevertheless, you know, some mothers cannot breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed. And so there has to be an alternative to that. The alternative to that is really infant formula. And you might notice in adverts in Ireland where you see, now you can see on TV, some adverts for infant formula, you notice that they're all for what they call follow-on formulas or older children, you know. It's not, it is not legally acceptable to advertise what they call stage 1 or infant formula from 0 to 6 months in the media in Ireland, as it is in Europe, because that's seen as competing with breast milk. So it's good to understand that background. So now we're manufacturing infant formula because breastfeeding is not an option. So effectively then we have to, if we're sitting in a chair in Shanghai, we're looking out and we're saying, well, where will we set up our new organization? Okay? And I think for anybody sitting in an office in Shanghai, the number one aspect is safety. So and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, there's been a history in China of food that has not been considered safe and has had quite negative impacts in the infant population in China. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But, you know, what we need to appreciate is that, you know, people in China and in many other countries across the world look at Europe as being a region that produces safe food. So Europe has been working through many, many decades and years in developing regulations to make food safe, you know. And now organizations around the world look at the regulations developed in Europe and say that is the best in class, or that is the best standard, you know. And so, you know, after the health scare phenomenon in China, the Chinese authorities basically looked at their regulations and decided that they needed to improve or upgrade their regulations. And they went around the world and they took a lot of the experience and the regulations from Europe and incorporated into the Chinese regulations. And I think they also took a lot from the US. So the US, in the US FDA, is seen as an expert in terms of food safety and food quality. The other interesting aspect is that if you live in China, the culture is such that people look at Europe as being the best. Okay, so products that come from Europe, not just food products, but many other products, are seen as being better or more advanced in the eyes of a Chinese customer. And so that's very important when it comes to food. So the Chinese culture sees food coming from Europe to be safe or safer than what it might obtain in China, and being well controlled, managed, and developed, you know. And really then Europe has a long history of producing infant formula, you know. I mean, if we look at companies like Mee Johnson or Danone, you know, or Lactalis, they've all originated in countries in Europe. So they've been producing foods and infant formula for many, many years. So around the world, Europe is seen as a place that has a long history of developing infant formula. And within that, Ireland is seen as one of the better places and has the extra, shall we say, benefit of being seen as a clean country relative to other countries, as being seen as a green country, and a big emphasis on grass-fed of cows. So while we might not appreciate it in Ireland, grass feeding of cows is quite unique across the world, and is really there are really only two countries in the world that are intensely grass feeding that I'm aware of. That's Ireland and New Zealand. So you have that extra natural aspect related to Irish formula. So if you look at Ireland, then Ireland has a huge dairy industry, and is exporting various dairy products to something in the region of 155 countries. So Ireland's well known long before this in terms of being a producer of good quality food across the world. So when one is looking at a country, it's not unusual to hear Ireland being mentioned as a good place to set up a business. What's amazing to me is that up to recently, 15% of the infant formula came from Ireland. So 15% of the world's consumption of infant formula came from Ireland. So that's a huge portion of infant formula coming from a relatively very small country in the world, which is Ireland. I mean, this is related to a huge delivery or supply of milk, with 7 billion litres of milk each year. And then as we look at within Ireland, if we look at if we talk about medical devices, Galway would come to mind as the centre of excellence, or the location for many medical device companies. If you think of pharmaceutical, one might think of Cork. But when you think of food, it's really the northeast region, and Monaghan in particular has a long history with food development and food manufacturing. So there's a lot of knowledge, history, and experience within that part of Ireland. I mean, it's very important to understand, and I suppose in the context of Brexit, very important to understand that Ireland being part of the EU means a lot to people outside of Europe. So again, when you're sitting in China and deciding to set up a plant, Ireland being part of the EU means a lot. It means a lot in terms of stability, but it also means a lot that we are operating to the EU regulations. So that brings a degree of comfort and confidence if you were setting up a plant in Ireland. And Ireland adopts all the EU regulations. So the regulations in Ireland around infant formula and follow-on formula production, it's not Irish rules, it's EU rules adopted into the Irish system. So Ireland is applying the same level of food safety, security, etc., as any other country in Europe. And Ireland is a very stable country, and politically it's very stable, socially it's very stable, financially it is very stable, even though sometimes we mightn't think so, but relative to other countries, it is very, very stable. And then on top of that, it has a huge supply of food ingredients. So when we look at those Irish companies, a lot of food ingredients is developed and managed in Ireland. So it's quite important, to keep that still relevant and still within the umbrella of the EU. So this is a slide I got from, thanks to Dairy Industry Ireland. And I think this slide is amazing to look at, and it shows you the amount of infant formula companies operating in Ireland. And for a relatively small country, we have a lot of dairy companies, and a lot of dairy companies that have a very strong brand name or brand recognition, both in Ireland and abroad. And I put a star there next to the locations where we've got within that dairy companies, we've got infant formula companies. So up in the north, there around Cavan, Monaghan, you have Abbott. As we move down along the east coast, we have Danone. Then moving up along the west, we've got Kerry in its Charleville site, and then you have Wyatt in Limerick. So, you know, for a small country, you have the biggest world players having manufacturing and developing operations in Ireland. So that gives Ireland a credibility. And again, if you're sitting in China and deciding to set up a company somewhere outside of China and in Europe, you know, looking at a country like Ireland and seeing the likes of Wyatt, Abbott, Kerry, Danone, having operations and exporting product from Ireland to China, it gives you confidence that Ireland is the right place to work in. So one of the important aspects is, you know, food is the responsibility of a government minister. You know, and again, we have to look at this through the eyes of somebody who's not living in Europe. So there is a senior minister responsible for food, you know, and that minister represents both Ireland in the EU when there's discussions around food and food regulations, but also is very, very important when that minister travels abroad. And I know that there is a huge value, particularly when the Minister for Agriculture visits China, especially at trade shows. So that's seen as China giving food a level of importance that is represented by a senior politician responsible for food safety. And then Ireland has set up with very good bodies around food and food safety. And the main body is the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, which reports directly into the minister. So this organization is set up to concentrate and take responsibility for delivering food, safe food within Ireland. And then the Food Safety Authority of Ireland then has contracted out certain responsibilities to the Department of Agriculture. And, you know, from an infant formula point of view, these responsibilities cover like reviewing sites for the first time to give, to see if they're qualified and capable of making infant formula in a safe and reliable manner, and also then ongoing monitoring of those sites. But if we have, you know, if there's any food safety concern or alert in Ireland, then you will see publications and communications directly from the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. So, you know, one can look at the Food Safety Authority of Ireland equals safe food in Ireland. When we're talking about infant formula, I think it's important to note that, you know, different foods present different risks, but infant formula is one of the highest risk foods that can be manufactured. And it's high risk because that food is used by effectively a baby. And, you know, that baby has no other source, particularly at 0 to 6 months, that baby has no other source of food and nutrition. So it's totally dependent on infant formula. So therefore, infant formula is considered from a risk point of view as one of the higher risk foods to make, and therefore, you know, gets a proportional amount of reviews and visits and oversight by the Department of Agriculture and the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. Okay. Just in terms of that organization, then it's quite important for Ireland, you know, for where prime ministers visit Ireland, and you know, the current prime minister or president of China visited Ireland. I think it was in 2012, and you know, that still is spoken about in China within the food industry. And when I visit China, you know, it nearly always comes up in conversation. So, you know, the Chinese have a long memory, even though 2012 seems a long time ago. It's still fresh in their memory, and they still refer to it in detail. And again, they see that as Ireland having a level of credibility and excellence to warrant a visit of their president. So if you go on to the Food Safety Authority of Ireland website, you'll see some screens like I've shown here. And I really just want to show this, that this is highly populated by references to guidelines to regulations. And when you open those guidelines, you will see that they all go back, most of them go back to a European regulation. So the Food Safety Authority has, collated all this information together, and its website is quite a good website in terms of trying to understand what's involved in manufacturing food in Ireland in terms of making it safe. What is the company obliged to do? But the point here I just want to make is that this is all linked with regulations in Europe. So Ireland has not created its own regulations. It has adopted the European regulations. A lot of information is on food safety, such as micro contamination, such as heavy metals contaminations, and the Food Safety Authority also looks at claims that are made on product and advertising. So it has quite a large scope of things to review. So I think that explains a little bit about the background. Maybe just talk a little bit about Newbase. So the Newbase group, like I said earlier, is based in Shanghai. It's in operation since 2002. It already has a dry blending manufacturing facility in Shanghai. And the site that it has set up in Carrickmacross in Monaghan is also a dry blending. So it's should we say, almost like a replication of the two sites, or a copy of the two sites. So it employs about 500 people in China. It has its own dedicated R&D team. It has its own in-house laboratory. And I suppose what's maybe unusual to us, but what's very common in China is, it has its own sales team. So the sale of infant formula product is very different in China. And when there are a lot of stores that are dedicated to selling baby product. And so when you walk into that store, as you approach the shelf, which has the particular product, somebody representing that company will approach you and give you advice and answer your questions. So if you move to a different shelf with different product, different infant formula, then a different person will approach you. So the salespeople are in the shops, but they're dedicated to the particular brands or formulations that are being sold. And so I suppose the thing really then is, there are two names being used with this company. So it's Newbase Ireland Nutrition and Ireland Nutrition. So the company set up and operating in Ireland is called Newbase Ireland Nutrition. But the product that will be made at this site for the Newbase company will have a brand called Ireland, which is effectively a combination of the word Ireland and the River Liffey in Dublin. So again, going back to what we spoke about earlier, it's important that the customer recognizes the product is made outside of China and it comes from where it comes from. So Ireland is a brand title or brand name to try and capture that and allow the customer in China to recognize that this is Irish made product coming from Europe. So the plant was opened in 2019, the end of 2019. This plant is fully equipped, and the opening was chaired by Heather Humphreys from the Department of Business Enterprise and Innovation, and the Chinese ambassador, Mr. He. So you can see the minister there, Heather Humphreys, as you look at the screen to my left, and at the very right, the gentleman with the blue tie is the Chinese ambassador in Ireland. And then the company is privately owned by two brothers from the Yu family. One of those brothers you can see standing next to Heather Humphreys, and the other brother is, shall we say, directly behind the Chinese ambassador. Okay, and I suppose there are just some pictures there outlining the opening. which was held in the Carrickmacross site. So I suppose what is the mission of Newbase Ireland? Well, the mission of Newbase Ireland is to produce high quality product. And initially it's going to be sold outside of the EU. So the EU market is pretty saturated or well supplied by existing customers. So it's difficult for a new organization to, shall we say, start supplying its own brand within Europe. So the opportunity is really outside of Europe. And at the moment, the opportunity is within China, based on where our parent company is. This, by product, what I mean is the terms used are stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And that really follows the age group of the baby or infant that's going to be consuming the product. So stage 1 is product from 0 to 6 months, stage 2 is 6 to 12 months, and stage 3, called follow-on, is 12 to 36 months. You know, and all these products that we're going to manufacture are based on European requirements, which in turn are a combination that come from many regulations from different countries, but also a worldwide organization called Codex. So the World Health Organization, Codex is linked with it, and it tries to, I suppose, set standards and guidelines, and those Codex standards and guidelines typically make their way into regulations, and you'll see a lot of that in the European regulations. I just want to emphasize that the company is, you know, obviously starting off with designing or manufacturing product under the Newbase or Ireland brand, but you know, the capacity and the vision of the company is also to do contract manufacturing. So in the future, what I'm hoping is we'll be seeing product coming out the door for shipping that has a Newbase brand, and other product coming out for shipping that has other brands on it that Newbase has been asked to contract manufacture. And contract manufacturing is quite common and very important in the infant formula business. So I suppose who's our customers? Well, our customers are young children. You know, they obviously it's different to many other customers in that they don't have the ability to give us feedback. They don't have the ability to talk and say, you know, that they didn't like what they were, the infant formula they were eating, or they thought it was very nice. So it's difficult to get that feedback directly. You know, the other thing is, you know, particularly when we're talking about China, you know, the cultural difference in China is different to that in, say, Europe. You know, in China for many years there was a one-child policy. So many of the families in China have one child. You know, so that puts a lot of focus on that child. The culture in China is really around family, whereas one might say the culture in Europe is more of an individual culture. You know, and by that what I mean is that the whole family takes care of this one child. So usually the mother and father are working. So it is very common for the grandparents to take care of the child. So the grandparents are working, are feeding and taking care of this infant child for its early years and many years. You know, and there's kind of a full circle there that when that child becomes older, it is obliged to take care of its parents. So, you know, the concept of moving to retirement homes or family homes when you get older is not a concept in Asia or in China. So this is kind of a full circle of responsibilities. So these grandparents in particular are very focused on their children or on the child, their grandchild. They're very focused on what that grandchild is eating, and they're very focused on the safety of that child. So the plant in Ireland has is on a site of 8,600 square meters. Or sorry, yes, the building is 8,600 square meters, and the site itself is 29,000 square meters. It's quite a large site, so there's plenty of room for expansion in the future. And I think that's one of the reasons that that the Newbase group in Shanghai selected this particular site. You know, it's an investment of about 20 million euros. And internally in the building, there's room for expansion before one needs to expand outside of it. And again, the company based in Carrickmacross is surrounded by other food processing businesses. So there's a lot of expertise and a lot of resources available within that region. Newbase Ireland is really a different company to other infant formula companies in Ireland. And it's different for a number of reasons. One is it's focusing on what I call small batches. So the four organizations that I spoke about already in Ireland manufacturing infant formula are large scale productions. Newbase has seen an opportunity to manufacture small quantities. And really what we're looking at is you know, the ability to look at when a new product is being designed. Obviously, you don't have the demand for large quantities, but when one is taking an existing product into a new market, then the demand will grow over a period of time. So this is quite a little bit unusual in Newbase in that its process is designed to handle small batches. And I think we are the first company in Ireland to be base powder independent. What I mean by that is Newbase is not linked to any dairy company or that supplies base powder, right? So it's prepared to buy base powder from any supplier that is deemed reasonable and safe. In many of the other companies in Ireland, they don't contract manufacture, or if you do carry out business with them, then you must use their base powder. So I think we're one of the first companies in Ireland that says, you know, we're not committed to any particular base powder. We'll use the base powder that either is best designed, or if we're doing contract manufacturing, the base powder that our customer feels is best. And so the company is highly designed then to carry out contract manufacturing from a different aspect to what may already exist in Ireland. And then this is all supported by a research and development group in China, which is there for, like I said, since 2002. So there's huge knowledge and infrastructure in there in terms of developing product, in terms of designing it. And then there's a laboratory there to do independent testing in China as well. So there's a big support package available from Newbase. And this is a picture really of some of the inside of the building. And I suppose, you know, first of all, the manufacturing is carried out in a clean room. So really when, you know, a lot of people, when they go to a store or shop and they look at the cans of infant formula, it's difficult to understand or appreciate that the amount of engineering and technology and controls that are involved in this. So, you know, the clean rooms are class 8 or class 100,000 clean rooms. They're validated to the ISO standard. You know, and approximately 900 square meters of the site are captured in that clean room environment. So effectively, when any of the ingredients or the product is exposed to the atmosphere, it is only exposed to the atmosphere in a clean room environment. And that is to provide safe product, particularly from a microbiological point of view. These are just some pictures here. As I look at the top at 12 o'clock, we're really looking at an automated robotic system for removing empty cans. So we buy, or we'll be buying our empty cans from a supplier based in Ireland. And these come in layers, and the layers are about 14 layers of cans in a pallet. So this automatically takes each layer off at a time and places the empty can on a reservoir table. So the whole manufacturing process within Newbase is automated as much as possible in order to reduce the amount of labor involved, because labor obviously can add quite an expense. So you'll see a lot of the processes automated. There around 1 or 2 o'clock, we can see a picture that includes a sifter. So for example, all the powder goes through a sifter to remove any foreign matter that might be in the powder and the ingredients, right? And this is part of the health and safety or the HACCP, hazard and critical control points. And that's one of our critical control points is the sifter. Next to the sifter there, you can see the blender. I suppose that's an example of where we're designed to manufacture small batches. If you went to many other companies, the blender would be of a much larger size. This allows us to concentrate on smaller volumes of smaller batches. And then the bigger picture at the bottom is the filler. So the company in Newbase in Carrickmacross is designed to fill the powder into metal cans. And what you can see there is a large can, or the large filler for the large can. That can usually take anything up from 800 to 900 grams, which is the typical can size that you see across the world. And then we have a separate filler for smaller cans. So you have a can that usually takes about 400 grams, which is a can that typically mothers would buy when they're trying out the formulation for the first time to make sure that it agrees with the digestive system of the child. In the next slide, we can see at the top the automated process for adding the dome lid or the cap. So that's the powder is now in the can and the dome lid is added. And inside that dome lid, when you open it up, you see a scoop, and then you have a foil seal between it and the powder. You know, so that powder is protected from the atmosphere within the can. There around 3 o'clock, you can see the automated wrapper. So the cans come in, and the pallet, or sorry, the carton is formed around the cans. And then the bigger picture, you can see similar to what we saw before, but this automated machine takes those cartons and builds up the pallet of finished product. So I suppose the question really is then, so I think that gives a brief introduction to Newbase and the way the manufacturing is set up, and kind of give you an image. So Newbase decided to set up its manufacturing in Ireland. It's set up its plant in Carrickmacross, which was the old Bose facility. It's been converted to manufacture infant formula. So now the question is, what registration do we need to do in order to make product in the Carrickmacross site? And I suppose the first thing is you need permission from Ireland, from the Irish authorities. So as I spoke earlier, you know, this is under the remit of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, who has then effectively contracted that to the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, because of their expertise. So the Department of Agriculture is basically saying, well, you know, you must have a quality system, which is very common in most companies. But the difference in the food production is that has to be built around what they call the HACCP program. So that's the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. So the quality system has to be designed to look at the hazards that are generated by what we're manufacturing and how we are going to eliminate those hazards. So that's a key point in the quality system for food industry. Then, you know, the department basically is saying that they want that equipment validated. So again, you know, this is not too dissimilar to my experience in medical devices, where you must validate your manufacturing process and your manufacturing equipment. But in this case, the department wants to witness that. So it's quite interesting that the department is dedicating time and personnel to come on site and actually witness product being made. So they will be on site when the first product is made to make sure that the way we're making it reflects the quality system. And the quality system has been shared with the Department of Agriculture prior to that. So each procedure that we have written, we have shared that with the department, who has had the opportunity to review it, make comments, and we've made updates based on those. So they've already know the quality system quite well before they come in. Then they come in and they witness the first production. And then the department takes away product. So they'll take away cans with them to get it independently tested. And this independent testing is done by the Department of Agriculture, not by the manufacturer. So this is the department's way of saying, well, I understand the quality system it's based on, and I know that's based on HACCP. I've seen the production and I've seen the validations, and now it's doing independent testing, which is typically testing for food safety elements such as microbes, contaminants such as heavy metal and pesticides. And if one is successful, then you get department approval. So the department basically says the site then in Carrickmacross has gone through this approval process and can make infant formula product. And infant formula being the highest risk, that then easily leads the way into making what they call follow-on formula or adult formula. The Chinese process is a little bit more complicated. You know, there are multiple organizations involved in it. So we first have to go to a group called the CNCA, where they have to, a bit like the Department of Agriculture, they have to review our manufacturing process, our quality system. And they say, well, yeah, you know, the standards, the best practices are in place in Carrickmacross, and Carrickmacross is authorized to make infant formula to be sold in China. It doesn't authorize the actual formulation itself. It just says this factory has the ability to make infant formula. We then have to go to another organization called the SAMR, where we submit the actual bill of materials or the formulation or recipe for infant formula. And they review those recipes independently and decide if the recipe is good enough for to be sold in the market. Then one has to go to another organization regarding importing product, and then one has to file the label. And then after all that, when the product finally reaches the ports of China, it has to go through a custom clearance. So this is quite a long process, but I think it reflects the importance that the Chinese organization place on food and particularly on infant formula. And I think this chart here really shows, you know, the different regulations that come together in order to allow sites such as Newbase and Carrickmacross make formula. So we've got, you know, regulations on hygiene rules from Europe. We've got the European rules for best practices regarding infant formula production. And then you've got the equivalent in China, the GB regulation, which again is dedicated to rules and requirements for making infant formula or formula for infants and young children. So one has to meet all those requirements before one can export product from Europe to China. And product made in Europe, even if it's not sold in Europe, must comply with the European requirements. So any product made in Europe and only sold in China must meet the European requirements as well as the Chinese requirements. And so at the end of all that process, hopefully what we see leaving the facility is a can of infant formula with the IRLIFE brand name in it. So you know, when I spoke about safety, there was an incident in 2008 in China. It was called the melamine incident. This is where a very small number of people, but nonetheless significant, added a chemical to the milk. This chemical, when the milk was tested, gave a very high protein value to the milk. And obviously, you know, like Ireland and many other countries, milk the price of milk is paid based on several attributes, one of them being protein. Okay. Unfortunately, that melamine was detrimental to children and caused serious health and in some cases death to some children. So the Chinese authorities, this caused a scandal in China, and basically it forced the Chinese to relook at their food safety regulations, and that's when they started benchmarking against Europe and the US, etc. So then the Chinese authority decided that, you know, there were too many manufacturing companies making infant formula for it to manage, and for it to be confident that there was a uniform approach. So it basically brought in a rule saying that, that any manufacturing site can only manufacture 9 formulations, okay? Or to put it another way, 3 product series. So if we looked at the slides earlier, you stage 1, 2, and 3. So that's under product A. You can have another stage 1, 2, and 3 under a different product B, and stage 1, 2, and 3 under product C. So what the Chinese authority are saying is, well, you can only make 3 product families or 9 formulations for the Chinese market. So really every company, every manufacturing site is limited by that. So when we looked at the 4 infant formula manufacturing sites in Ireland, the maximum that they can produce is 9 formulations out of those sites. Okay? So that really then, when we look at the market and this data, you know, there's 1,311 infant formulas produced or sold in China that are coming from 166 manufacturers. But there's quite a breakdown in difference between where those manufacturers are based. And the vast majority, as we can see there, are based in China. So the domestic market, or the domestic manufacturers, have increased significantly over the last number of years, particularly since this rule was brought into place. So out of that 1,311, 303 products are produced by 51 manufacturers outside of China. And you can see in the graph there where Ireland lies in that context. So, you know, the Netherlands has quite New Zealand has quite a large number of formulas registered and sold in China, followed by the Netherlands, etc. And then we can see where Ireland is. So Ireland has 21 formulations registered. So now these are the number of formulations registered, which is not necessarily equals the volume sold. So, you know, with the 15% of infant formula in the world coming from Ireland, a large portion of that is going to China. So those 21 registrations are historically anyway have sold quite a large number in China. So I think it shows you where Ireland is relative to other countries in terms of producing infant formula for China. So, you know, Newbase is in the process of becoming, going through the approval process, both with the Department of Agriculture and then after that with the Chinese authority. And just want to express my appreciation really to the Food Safety Authority of Ireland for all their help and the guidance and the huge resources in their website. Express my appreciation really to the Department of Agriculture. So prior to COVID, you know, the Department of Agriculture officials, you know, visited our site to look at the setup and is now reviewing our procedures remotely, etc. So they're being very accommodating, particularly around the COVID period, and also help from groups such as Enterprise Ireland. And of course, you know, when this company was being set up, a lot of help from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. So a big thanks to everybody in that. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope it made sense, and you know, I think now I'll hand back to you, Andrew, and if there are any questions.